We were all hiding behind the sofa. Surprise!
Yeah, exactly. Well, maybe then, maybe I get used to this and then I gotta do more video
True. It's
podcasts.
the worst form of surprise
Ooh.
party. Oh boy. Well, welcome to the podcast, friend. Let's have a little fun.
Welcome to the What's Your Baseline podcast, where we demystify enterprise architecture and business process management.
We're here to bring best practices and lessons learned from our years to your ears, as well as interviewing friends we met along the way on our professional journeys.
My name is Roland Volt, and I'm joined today by my co-host, JM Erlinson. Hey, JM, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty good, Roland. I got to tell you, some days are fun, some days are hard, but I particularly like days where I get to see my name in lights.
Ooh.
I'm having a couple of webinars go off next week, and I got a chance to put a byline in a pretty cool publication. So if you've checked me out on LinkedIn, you can see a couple of the cool things that by the time we publish this, I have recently done. And I'm excited to share it with all of our friends. How have you been, my friend?
Well, I don't know. I don't have that exciting life, It's it got a little bit colder. So this morning it was in the 60s and I had to wear a fleece sweater, because I'm a wimp.
As far as I remember, you always wear a sweater no matter what the weather is.
Hey, look at this, man. Look at this. Look at this. Short sleeve.
Oh, that is that is actually really strange.
Immediately on topic. I love it. So, ladies and gentlemen, you're hearing the voice of the incomparable Olaf Geyer, and he's our guest for today's conversation. Olaf, welcome to What's Your Baseline?
Thank you.
Yay.
Thank you.
and maybe just to have it said, Olaf and I have a history of like 17 years or so in various companies. So it'll be all fine. But Olaf, we obviously have a very interesting topic to talk about, which is how to choose your first project for process mining, which can be interesting. And I'm curious about learning about your opinion on this. I know you spent some time recently on that topic. But before we get to that, obviously our audience likes to know a little bit more about you, what you've done, what you're doing, why you're here, what your bucket list items are, and why your cat is not on the screen.
Because I just kicked out the cat. Otherwise, she's going to be nibbling at my feet the whole afternoon. No, so about myself. So my name is Olaf Geyer. I'm with Software AG. Actually, I've been with Software AG and IDS Share since '97, so it's quite long history. I had many roles and positions at Software AG, and then I had a short stint with Roland at iGraphics. But now I'm back here. And my main focus is process consulting with process mining here at Software AG. My bucket list, I'm actually working on my black belt in Krav Maga. It's probably going to take another couple years to get there, but I'm working on it. I already have a black belt in Taekwondo and Karate. So this is maybe then my black belt number 3. And then by that time, I'm probably ready to retire or too old to do anything else.
Well, then I'm happy that this is a remote recording.
It's strictly self-defense. So if you leave me alone, I leave you alone.
Wow. Well, we're not going to leave you alone today a little bit because we have some pretty important questions about process mining, and particularly for today's conversation, process mining readiness. So, hey, everyone out there in podcast land, I'm sure you've been interested in process mining. I'm sure you maybe even sort of try to pilot it out, maybe try to pitch it to folks around you. But what do you need to know how to start process mining, and how do you make decisions on where to start, how to start, and what you're going to need? So, Olaf, first and foremost, tell me about the concept of process mining readiness and what sorts of things you should start thinking about when you're thinking about process mining.
Yeah, so the whole idea behind the process mining readiness is that we have seen in the past in other projects that there are a lot of surprises, especially on the customer side, where they have underestimated the requirements, that you really need to have in place in order to do your first process mining projects. And also they have underestimated the effort or, what it takes to generate or get to the data for the process mining projects, right? So process mining readiness in that regards helps you to helps you to assess where you are and helps you with planning for the next project, so that for the first project, so that you're so that it becomes more efficient and faster in terms of how you generate value, right? So the challenges are really that process mining is not as simple as it maybe sounds or maybe have read online, or as your process mining provider might make you believe. Also, if you think about process mining, you probably have a number of processes in mind that you want to mine, but not every process is actually applicable, especially if it's like a new or an initial project and you don't have the necessary experience really to be, to run a project in that space, right? And the other thing that we have found is that the organizations are like overly optimistic about the data that they actually have available to do a process mining project, right? If you run a transactional system like Oracle or SAP, you're probably in a better state than if you have a lot of homegrown systems where the data is not as structured as you might think. And it takes quite some effort to understand what kind of data you actually need, where do you find the data, what kind of work you need to do on the data in order to make it mineable. And with the process mining readiness, we're kind of trying to overcome these barriers and get you to the state that you can successfully start a project. The other thing we find is that some of the stakeholders or the management might be overly optimistic about what the outcome of a process mining project might be, or have unrealistic expectation. So with the readiness assessment, we also will scope the project in a way that the expectations are probably met and that we have clear defined objectives on what you actually need to look for or what you actually want to look for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Roland, I think you and I have had the same experience as Olaf, where senior stakeholders don't actually understand the technology and its capabilities. They maybe have seen a presentation about it. They've been given some slideware. They've been pitched the idea, but they don't understand the nuts and bolts of things. And their estimations are wildly off. Actually, we talk about this a lot in the realm of AI. People believe that it's magic. Like you push a button and suddenly process mining and your organization is optimized. And
wait. JM, you're working for a vendor who sells process mining software. Are you saying that it's not that simple?
I'm saying that it can be simple, but you need to structure it.
And that's why we're trying to help you. We were trying to help simplify the process, right?
So let's get started. Let's get started with the first topic that comes to mind. To me, is, as you said, well, which process do I choose? Right. You mentioned that not every process is applicable to be the first project. So what is the criteria that you see, or what is your recommendation on, for me as a newbie, to say, yeah, I got all my 1500 APQC processes modeled out. Which one do I pick?
Yeah, which one should you pick? I think you should. There are a couple of criteria that we can look at, right? So one is you should pick a process that is relevant in the sense of that if you make any significant contributions to that process, it has an impact on the business in a positive way, right? So there should be definitely a positive outcome that you're looking at to achieve. On the other hand, it should not be so complicated that either the mining or the implementation of the opportunity makes it too complicated or generates too much effort or time to actually achieve that. So it should be a more smaller, more simplistic process, but with like a good impact. You should also have some ideas about how the process works in terms of the process flow. You might have process diagrams for that or some other documentation. So you understand the process very well, so you can validate to some degree the process mining output with your understanding of the process, even though I can tell you 100%, the process that you mine never looks like the process that you're expecting in any case. And the other thing also, you want to have the data, right? So ideally that process runs on one single system, and you have a pretty good understanding of where the data is residing and how the data is structured in order to be successful and efficient with your first mining project. So that's would be some of the key criteria, I think, to look into for selecting the first project process.
When I look at these criteria, there are a few different things here that I got to be honest with you, feel a little bit disappointing. For senior executives who wanted to simply hit the process mining button and improve things, for organizations that have incredibly complex processes that run through lots of different systems, for processes that are not well understood that you kind of want to baseline and discover from nothing. Tell me, first and foremost, let's go with the last thing. Tell me why it's not useful to process mine in the unknown. And I'm saying you have no reference process, you have little business knowledge. I'm thinking a lot of like mining from legacy systems. Why is that not a great starting point for process mining?
Well, I mean, for one, right, we're talking about, our first project and the first readiness, right? So what we want to have in these projects, there's in a lot of instances more like like a POC for some organizations is, right? You want to have results, right, that are actually hopefully positive, right? So what you want to do is you want to have, achievable goals in the first project. You want to have some low-hanging fruits that you can achieve and prove that process mining actually working. Um, you want to understand the process in a way that once you look at the results of process mining, you can kind of say, yes, this is kind of what we believe, in what the process looks like, or it's at least close to that, versus you don't even know how the process looks like, and then you get like a giant spaghetti chart on your process mining project, you're going to be completely overwhelmed. You're also not believing what you're actually going to see, versus if you have some basic understanding of the process and some SMEs that you can work with, then it becomes much more easier to bridge what you see in process mining towards what you understand of the process, and then identify opportunities how to improve the process. Right. So you want to have a certain baseline in this case, right, to be successful with your first project, yeah? and that's also what the readiness helps you with, right? Once you have built the experience from the first iteration of process mining, then moving into more complex areas or more unknown areas will be much easier than starting with a really large complex process or a completely unknown process, and it will help you to ensure success. And with the success comes, the resources, the buy-in, and everything else that you need in order to really bite off the next bigger part. Right?
So I have two questions on this. One is the timeline, for your first project that you do.
Mm-hmm.
And the other question that I have is, obviously, you mentioned you need a group of people. Obviously, what's that group of people being comprised of? So which type of roles do you have? But
Right.
maybe we talk about the timeline first. So what you're saying is I should grab the most complicated process that I can with as many systems that I can, and then build some very complex technical data pipes that feed it real time in my process mining project. Is that what you're saying as a good first project?
No, that's not what you want to do, right? So if you talk about timeline, so the readiness assessment is about, depending on again what your experience is when you come into this kind of thing and how well you're prepared. Takes a couple of days, right? Again, the main challenges is really in the interaction with the stakeholders, identifying, what processes you're really interested in, digging a little bit deeper behind the process in terms of complexity, availability. The data for sure takes some digging, of course, and then you want to also set achievable goals and expectations, and that's part of the readiness assessment. Takes like in total duration like 1 to 4 weeks, but that's not full time. That's like really how long it takes until gathering the data, gathering the stakeholders, organizing the workshops, and so on. Once you have all this done, this actually will shorten the actual implementation project, which then can take another 2 to 4 weeks, depending on the complexity, and again depending on the availability of your data in order to complete. Obviously, this is a little bit more hands-on, so there will be more total time consumed. But that's some realistic expectations, especially for like an unexperienced organization, between 2 to 6 weeks to get like from readiness all the way to like the first results in your mining projects.
And just to have it said, this has not given you any sort of first results as to making a change. We're simply talking about the discovery of the process itself. And I we talk a lot about process intelligence as an exercise of getting to the point of meaningful change. I wonder how much, Olaf, the advent and the popularization of process intelligence may add another component to your sort of evaluation, which is that you should pick a process that you have sort of the scope of control to change for political reasons or for various business constraints and things like that. If you can't change the process you're mining, I would assume that there is some perceived loss of value in the exercise at all, because all you're doing is throwing up a flag and saying, there's a problem here, but we're not going to solve it.
Yeah, and we have seen that as well, that, I've came across customers where they said, yeah, we know what the problem is. We know how much money we're losing, but we don't have the resources, the time or the energy or the goodwill to actually change what is not working. And the same danger here, of course, can happen with process mining, right? That's what I said in the beginning, picking a process where you have the ability to make an impact or a change in a positive way, hopefully, based on the results of the mining project, is definitely a key here to generate ROI and prove the ROI, right? And that also something that you need to have at the end of the mining project is to generate the momentum to actually make the changes, and then look and compare, the performance of the process before and after the change, which then gets you in like the holy grail of continuous lifecycle management, which is I'm looking at the process, identify the opportunities, I make the changes, I implement the changes, I measure the results, and then I keep continuously improving the process, right? So that's obviously where we want to get at the point. But again, with readiness, we're like practically at step 0 and trying to kind of kickstart the whole thing.
Agreed, but I don't think that at this point in the game we're at that point of the game, right? I think
we're not.
We're at the point where you want to have identified your first project, your first process, you do it, you get your feet wet and all that other stuff. So before we close out that first part, I think, Olaf, it would be great if you could give us a short summary on the cliff notes on what people should look for when they choose their first process mining project.
Yeah, so the first process you want to look at, it should have, as I said, achievable goals, right? You want to align, the outcome of the process mining project with some goals that you already have or some problems you already identified. So, it should be goal-oriented. It should be a low-hanging fruit, something that is achievable. It should be a process that you have a good understanding of in terms of documentation, in terms of subject matter experts that are available. That then can help you with validating the outcome. It should not be too complex in terms of the overall flow, but also in terms of the data that you're looking at. It should have the right data, and we come to the data, I guess, in the next step. And as we said, it should be transformable. That means you have some impact or influence on how the process is performing, so that you can actually implement opportunities that you have found.
That makes a lot of sense to me, Olaf. And I got to tell you, this whole thing makes a ton of sense to me. But I want to turn this around to our audience because they've been listening for 20 minutes, nicely buttoned up. Tell us a little bit about yourself, or think about this. You've got ambitions for process mining. So what are some processes you think might be right for you? Do you have processes that are important, that provide value to the organization, with accessible data that you can get your hands on, that you understand and have a blueprint for, that you can actually affect and change for the better, and that you have the people and the executive buy-in to really make a difference? We'll leave you for a moment to consider your world of process and process mining. We'll come back after the short break with our second section, some lessons learned and how to make it happen.
Yeah, welcome back. Olaf, very, very interesting approach that you have, because most projects I've worked in process mining were like, oh, great, we have that new software. Let's dive in. Nobody looked at a specific readiness phase, if you will.
Right.
But it makes complete sense. And Olaf, you and I had our shared experience there. It makes complete sense to take a step back and have a look at what the process mining project, your initial one, should accomplish, like learn something or get some output from it. But I'm just thinking out loud here. What have you seen when you plan for process mining, how that initial project should fit into the bigger thing? And you alluded a little bit in the first part, but maybe you can elaborate a little bit more about the importance and your recommended objectives for that first project.
Yeah, the key here is that you want to think about, how does process mining fit into the bigger picture of what you're trying to do, within your business. We talked about the process management lifecycle, which is an important aspect of that. But in order to show success and show ROI, right? The activities that you're doing in process mining should fit into a larger context of the programs that you're running, and also align with business expectations and stakeholder objectives, right? So if you do the process mining in the pure vacuum, pick a process, do some mining, look at your objectives, and then say, hey, I fixed this problem. This may or may not impress anybody, right? But if you have that in a bigger picture of where company is going to and what are like the leadership objectives, then you can say, hey, by the way, we can show you how this tool and this approach aligns with the objectives that you're having, and how we can make an impact to move the needle into into an area that helps the company, right? So we do have a lot of times when we go to customers, and that's not limited to process mining, is when we ask the customer, hey, why are you doing this? What are your objectives? How does this align to the bigger company directions? They have actually a hard time articulating that. And if you're prepared for that, then you can show more ROI, and then you have a higher chance of succeeding with ongoing process mining initiatives.
And this is just the focus looking at process mining as a project, right?
Right.
I think the bigger picture is, and we had that pitch 20 years ago, Olaf, you might remember that, is where you can improve what you can't measure, right? So how does your process perform? And I think process mining is a technology that can fit nicely into do this process performance measurement, because why would you run a process without a speedometer? If you remember, JM, when we had James on the show, talking about, how fast do I drive, and you don't watch the trees passing by. You look on your dashboard and you say, oh, I'm driving 65, So why wouldn't you do that? And the one thing that I notice is still, after a couple of years that process mining became mainstream, it's still seen as, oh, that new special thing. It's something completely different. But in all seriousness, it should have been part of the tool stack from the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're looking at Measure for a long time, right? But it was, before process mining came into place, a little bit more static, right? We had, performance dashboards and Aware and all these great things in the past, but they were more on the static side, and the data that you have to get are more, BI centric, or like you have to create quite a lot of effort to generate the data. Right now with process mining, we look at the entire context more dynamically, but also we're looking at how the process is stringed together from a system perspective, which is a big eye opener for a lot of customers. When you look at the data that comes out of process mining, they're like, this is not how we do business. And we're like, yeah, that might not be the way how you do business, but that's the way how your system is actually running your business. And there might be a gap, expectation gap, right? And it's very likely.
In most cases, it's the same.
It's
the same. You're running it that way. You just don't want to realize it or recognize it.
Yeah. Oh my God. How many times projects were like, you show the data back and they're like, no, it's not our data. And it's like, I got bad news for you, buddy.
It's very, very true. Right?
But talking about data, or like Olaf, I want to center this down on inbound data, because ultimately a big part of the process mining readiness for me is data readiness, right?
Yes.
Like, I've heard customers say over and over again, and I want you to quash this right away. We don't have any data. We can't do process mining because we don't have any data. And to me, that doesn't say they don't have data, because I don't think that's true. Most are like, I don't think any modern ERP or business rules engine doesn't capture transaction logs. But I think they're saying things about their data readiness. So tell me a little bit about how you can understand and prepare the data you need to get started with process mining.
Yeah, so definitely every customer has data, right? I mean, as you said, data is there somewhere, but data is not always data. So when we look at data in terms of process mining, for the people that maybe don't know, right, what we're typically looking at is some kind of transactional data, right, which practically means I have some activities that the system performs, and I have a timestamp that is associated with that activity. Ideally, you have a starting and an end time, so then the system strings together these different events or activities, or whatever you want to call it, with data stamps. And process mining practically takes all this data and puts it in a row depending on the timestamps, and generates a process out of that. But it also looks at transitions from activity A to B to C, or if there are different transitions based on the timestamp, then you get different permutations in the process, and this is how the variations then show up in terms of how the system is stringing these activities or events together in terms of sequence, right? And that's where most of the surprises come, that people think, yeah, it's going to be A, B, C, D, E, F, G, but in reality, it's going to be very convoluted, and it's not as straightforward as people think, right? But if you talk about data, then obviously the first question we're going to ask is, what kind of data do you actually need in order to answer the business question, right? That should be always the first question. What's the business problem we're trying to solve, right? It goes back to the goal-oriented process mining. And then you should say, okay, what data do you need? And then where does the data reside, right? So what systems are actually providing the data for the processes that they were looking at? And then you need to talk to the system owner or the DB admins or anything to understand more on the structure of the data and what you can actually find in the logs. So you can find anything from like transactional based, like a ERP system, to freeform text on the other part of the spectrum. And somewhere in between there is probably where the customer data is. And you need to find, what data bits and pieces are of interest, so that you can then actually generate these event logs in process mining. So having an activity log with the start and end date as the minimum for process mining, plus an case ID, very important as well, right? So you need to identify what is the process actually looking at? Is this an order? Is it a financial transaction? Is it the customer behavior? That can then point to different IDs that you need to extract from the system that practically identifies the flow of that particular point of interest through your process or through your system data.
But there's also a different thing. You said it, so I'm just repeating it in different words, right? I think what you need to look at is also what is the contextual data that you need. So, for example, you and I worked with a global bank looking at their project management process, from idea to implementation, and it became pretty clear that to the transactional data, you had to add the contextual data. What type of project was it? Right. Where did it take place and all that stuff? Because that was helping then to say, okay, how do we do an analysis and do we see those insights? Is it that certain type of project that always is super expensive or has this thing, or is it in a certain country? Whatever it is, I think you need to bring that in, and that obviously needs to be reflected in your data set. Right. So it's not that you just fire up your Excel and just copy and paste. So you need to have a little bit more, how do I say that? Elaborate means of bringing those data sets together.
For sure. So, I mean, the contextual data, right? That's what really then makes, the goal oriented, right? Understanding the process flow by itself is great, right? But yes, the contextual data typically gives you then the SLAs, for example, that you're measuring, or the performance data of the different resources or the regions or organizations, whatever you're looking for. But all, again, this is driven by the goal of why you're actually doing the mining project, right? There's some other data aspects that we not have discussed is, how easy is it to get to the data? Can I extract the data in a meaningful way? What's the output format? How much can I convert it? And then there are all kinds of, data security questions as well that you need to think about in terms of, can you get access to it? Do you need to mask the data? Are you even allowed to get the data? Who can see the data? There's a lot of stuff that you need to think about in terms of data that people underestimate again when they go into these mining projects. And then that's why you have a delay in these initial projects if you don't do the right readiness, right? So the readiness helps you also with, identifying all these problems up front so that when you actually start, the initial project, we have solved all the data problems and can actually go into the mining part, right?
But again, I don't know. I sound as if I don't pay attention. I should be a better interview host. But anyways, so I would love that you would drill down a little bit more into the goal-based process mining, because what does that actually mean? You mentioned, yes, the biggest question: why do we do process mining? How does it fit into the bigger picture of a process lifecycle of our management system and so on? But I think there's also a second thing when you look at the individual process that you've chosen to say, okay, what do we want to figure out about this process, right? And for that, you obviously, and I know you know the answer, you obviously want to get your arms around the scope. And I'm wondering what the means is that you would apply to get this articulated.
Yeah, we're using this fancy word hypothesis-based process mining, right? So, and I actually built this in here a couple of times, so I learned how to spell it and how to write it. So the hypothesis practically is the idea that as the customer or as a process mining consumer, you define an element of the process that is either identifies a shortcoming of the processing. We believe that there's a problem in this process because XYZ, or it identifies an opportunity saying, well, if we could improve XYZ, then this would have a positive impact on some SLAs or KPIs or whatever it is. Right. So you can either look at it from, I know there's something wrong with the process, or I believe there's something wrong with it, or I want to achieve a certain positive outcome, I want to improve something, or move the needle in certain spaces, or where the process doesn't necessarily have to be wrong. And I define that hypothesis, which then gives the person that does the analysis on the process mining something to work with, saying, okay, let's look into all the data and the dimensions that are aligned with that hypothesis and see how the process looks like in that terms. And that typically then also brings some really interesting results. There's some pitfalls with that as well, which we maybe gonna talk about as well when we talk about lessons learned. But the hypothesis will help you to define the goal, it helps you to identify the data elements that you need to look at, and then it also helps you to identify the data that you actually need in order to prove or disapprove the hypothesis that you had at the beginning of the project.
And who contributes to that hypothesis generation?
Well, typically is the business owner or the stakeholder, right? That says, well, I think I have a problem here. Can you help me fix it, or is it really a problem or not? One of my last projects, they had some very strict SLAs, and they saw the SLAs were a problem, but we could actually disapprove that the SLA actually was not a problem, and they had but we found other opportunities for the process. But in this case, we kind of disapprove the hypothesis, or we also make their case stronger that they're actually good on the SLA part, but there are other ways how they can improve process performance.
Well, Olaf, all great points. Obviously, some people like me are a little bit stubborn and they don't want to get told what they are supposed to do. So maybe you can give us a quick summary of maybe what not to do.
Right. So first and foremost, obviously, is ignoring the need for preparation, right? You should not do that. As it comes with any other project, but here also in process mining, right? The whole idea of the whole notion of the readiness assessment is to get you prepared for the project so that you know what to look for, what you want to mine, how to mine it, where the data is, and so on, right? The other thing we learned as part of the readiness assessment is that you actually maybe want to look upfront at the actual data before you start the mining. Because even though we have the data logs, even though we have maybe data models and so on, once you start actually looking at the actual data, you might be surprised of the complexity or the content, or you might find out that, yes, I thought I have this data logs, I have these timestamps and so on, and you might not have them, right? All this data might be hidden somewhere else, certain complexity, or as I said, I've seen free text where you're like, yeah, it's great that you have all this stuff in text form, but there's like no way to extract this because it's like, free for there's no way to pass this kind of data, right? So that's definitely can be a shocker. And then obviously the whole project goes off the rails if you don't have the data that you need, right? Last but not least, this hypothesis saying, I have this hunch that there's something wrong with the process. The pitfall is that, yes, I proved to you that the hunch was right, and you say, oh, I knew it all along, and why do I need process mining, right? Which is the wrong conclusion of that hypothesis, right? It should be the opposite, saying, okay, yes, process mining can help me, validating the hypothesis. That means if I have other problem areas that I'm looking at, I can really use process mining to identify these process areas and hopefully find ways to improve, right? So the notion that you already know what the problem is and then just seeing it in process mining reinforces not an indicator that there's something wrong with process mining as a tool by itself, but the opposite is, yes, it actually works.
That never happens, Olaf.
Because we can help you, right? Or in some instances, your hunch was wrong and that's not the real problem. The problem is somewhere else, right? So you have to be careful with, management of expectation again here is a critical element to that, right?
Then Olaf, what do you do next? What happens after this all? Like we've done all the parts of this process mining project. What do you do with the assessment?
Yeah. So the assessment obviously, should give you like a whole list of things to do, right? First and foremost is you need to reassure your management buy-in that you actually want to move forward with the project, that the selection of the process and the objectives that you have defined for the for the mining project are still in line with the management expectations of what they want to do, right? So goal setting again is very important, and as always, you want to make your manager happy. The next thing is preparing the data for sure, right? There will be some homework in that regards. I would expect coming out of these readiness assessments saying, hey, this is the data we need. This is kind of the preparation you need to do. These kind of the data points we need. There's some extraction that you might need to do. There's some masking you might need to do. There's different things that you need to do in regards to the data to make that. The next thing is communication, right? One, we obviously communicate this with the management buy-in. The other one is communicating with the rest of the stakeholders saying, hey, by the way, this project is coming. We want to do this and this. This is your participation. We need the SMEs. We need a process modeler. We need some analysts. We need some people that provide feedback on the opportunities that we find that can validate the outcome and then can help us with identifying and defining the ROI, yet then especially the result of the project, right? Then you want to get the team ready. You need a lot of resources. I think we didn't even get into listing all these people, but there's a lot of resource. Maybe that's also another podcast we can do about skill set and people involved in process mining, right? And then also maybe you want to get ready saying, hey, by the way, we're expecting, certain outcomes out of this process mining activity. We want to improve the process. So you want to get ready also to actually be able to improve. Means I have the people there. I have, I have, resources that I can, assign to that, depending on the ROI, people, money, time that you want to spend and actually make it happen. And that's all things that you can get ready upfront before you go into the first activities on the mining side itself.
Seeing process mining as an investment is really important, right? Like this is an investment in process transformation.
It is, but it should prove and pay by itself, right? That's the whole goal setting ROI part, right? Where we, obviously we want to see, if the opportunity and the ROI that we're expecting, will help you there. Right?
Olaf, thank you so much for getting us through this process mining readiness conversation and the things you need to look out for. So let's turn it back to you, audience. Where are you going to start with your process mining? What data do you need to gather? What people do you need to gather? What baseline, what plan, and how are you going to align everything together to generate what you need to justify and leverage your process mining platform? We'll leave you for a moment, give you a chance to think, and come back with our conclusions for the episode.
I gotta get out of here. I gotta get out of here. I'm climbing up the walls. I gotta get out of here.
Well, Olaf, this was a very, very interesting conversation because I have to admit, I didn't think about having a pre-project, if you will, right? And make the readiness assessment a phase that you might want to think about it if you implement process mining as a technology or as a discipline in your organization. So very interesting. So, but I'm pretty sure if I have that question, and again, you and I know each other for many, many, many years, so I know your address. But how can people who listen to you for the first time, how can they reach you if they think, oh, that's an interesting question? And Olaf, can you elaborate a little bit more about this or that topic?
Yes, for sure. So you can always reach me on LinkedIn, or you can reach also JM, who will more than happy to transfer your request to me, and then we can help you. We have a service for that, especially really since our experience is that it makes the actual project so much easier and faster if you have this readiness assessment. But so LinkedIn is a good place to start. And if you cannot reach me, then you can always reach JM or somebody else from Software AG that you know.
And this is a huge thank you to all of our audience members who come along with us on this journey. You've been a wonderful audience to have with us. I love your questions. I love your comments. Please keep hitting us up on LinkedIn or hello@whatsyourbaseline.com. We'd love to hear more from you. Now, if you want to find out more about this particular episode, you can go to whatsyourbaseline.com/episode 74. But until next time, friends, I've been J.M. Erlinson.
I'm Olaf Geyer.
And my name is Roland Roth.
And we will see you in the next one.